She dove into the river to save a drowning child, never expecting the girl to be a billionaire's daughter. When the father offers her anything in return, she walks away in silence. Why would a poor woman reject a millionaire's gratitude, and what is she hiding that could destroy them all? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The scent of burnt coffee and grilled cheese clung to Eva Reyes's clothes as she left the small diner on the edge of town. Her shoes were soaked from a leaking kitchen pipe, her hair pulled into a messy bun, and her tip jar lighter than it had been all week. But she didn't complain. Eva never complained. She just walked, one hand buried in the pocket of her thin jacket, the other clutching a small envelope with crumpled cash, another piece of her quiet plan to escape. She passed the river every day on her walk home. It wasn't the scenic kind people took pictures of, just a winding stream with broken railings and wild overgrowth, its water murky and deceptively fast. Today, though, something felt different. A scream shattered the ordinary hum of the evening traffic. Eva turned her head sharply, eyes narrowing at the sound. "Help, please, my daughter, someone help." A man's voice, hoarse with panic, echoed from across the riverbank. But Eva's eyes weren't on the man. They were locked on the little girl flailing in the water, barely visible between the rush of current and weeds. Without hesitation, Eva dropped her bag and sprinted toward the edge. She didn't stop to think. She didn't scream for help. She just dove in. The cold water shocked her system, but she pushed through, swimming hard against the current. The child was being pulled downstream fast, small arms thrashing, mouth open in silent terror. Eva reached her just in time, wrapping her arms around the little body and kicking hard toward the nearest pile of rocks jutting from the riverbed. The girl coughed and sputtered in her arms. "You're okay," Eva gasped, her voice low and calm despite the ache in her chest. "You're okay now, I've got you." By the time she dragged both of them onto the riverbank, people had gathered, whispering, pointing. A few started filming. Eva ignored them. She held the girl close, brushing wet hair out of her eyes. "Emily," the man's voice boomed as he ran toward them, suit soaked from his knees down. He dropped beside them and pulled the girl into his arms. Eva slowly stepped back, shivering, brushing mud off her arms. She was just starting to gather herself when the man stood up and turned toward her. Udi's eyes faltered, his eyes scanning her face. "You saved her." Eva looked down, uncomfortable beneath his intense gaze. "She was drowning. Who are you?" he asked. She hesitated, "Just someone passing by." "Please," he said, reaching into his coat. "Let me give you something, anything." She stepped back again. "No, I don't want anything." His brows furrowed. "You don't understand. I have resources. You just saved my daughter's life." Ava met his eyes for the first time. "You're welcome," she said softly, "but I don't need your money." Then she turned and walked away, shoes squishing wet in every step, soaking wet and silent as the man stood frozen behind her. His daughter was safe in his arms, but his world had tilted, not just because his little girl had nearly died, but because the woman who had saved her wanted nothing from him. Not even his name. Donnick Vance stood in the dying light of the riverbank, holding his shivering daughter close, but his eyes stayed locked on the figure disappearing down the street. The woman hadn't given her name, she hadn't even paused to let him thank her properly. Most people would have clung to the opportunity. His name alone could open doors, change lives. But she'd just... "Daddy?" Emily murmured into his soaked shoulder, voice trembling. "She helped me breathe. She didn't let me go." "I know, baby," he whispered, brushing the damp hair from her forehead. "She was very brave." He glanced around, but the woman had vanished, gone like a shadow, leaving only the image of her wet hair clinging to her neck and the haunting steadiness in her voice as she cradled his child. Something about her struck deep. Like he'd seen that look before, in the mirror on nights when the grief crept in. Later that night, Eva returned to her tiny rented room above a florist's shop. The landlady, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a soft heart, looked up from her chair in the hallway. "You're drenched," she said. "Fell into the river. Ava replied simply, clutching her bag. The landlady didn't press. No one around here did. Ava had built her world on silence and low expectations. She worked the morning shift at the diner, cleaned hotel rooms in the afternoon, and kept to herself. No friends, no family, just enough to keep breathing. She peeled off her wet clothes and stood under the shower for longer than she could afford to. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the image that wouldn't leave her mind. The little girl's face, the way her fingers had gripped Ava's wrist like she'd known her all her life. And those eyes, wide, terrified, trusting. Ava didn't cry. She hadn't cried in years, but something in her chest ached, like a memory trying to claw its way to the surface. She buried it the same way she always did, by pulling out her notebook and writing numbers: rent, groceries, bus fare. A small column labeled Escape Fund. Dominic, meanwhile, paced the length of his penthouse apartment, still soaked from earlier. His assistant had brought dry clothes and ushered the press away from the building, but he hadn't spoken to anyone yet, not even his board members who'd been waiting at the fundraiser he never showed up to. Emily was asleep now, finally safe, wrapped in her favorite blanket with the scent of river mud still clinging to her hair. He sat beside her bed, watching her breathe, then pulled out his phone and searched local news feeds. Nothing, no names, no footage yet. She hadn't even left a clue. The next morning, Ava showed up at the diner on time, her uniform clean but still faintly damp. The manager scolded her for not calling out, then barked at her to refill the coffee pots. She did it all without a word, grateful for the routine. But at 9:17 a.m., a sleek black car parked outside the diner's front window. Ava noticed it only because the other waitress gasped. "Isn't that Dominic Vance?" she whispered. Ava didn't look up. Her hands moved mechanically as she poured coffee for table 3, but her pulse ticked faster. The bell above the door jingled. Ava turned slowly. Dominic stood in the entryway, perfectly pressed suit, storm behind his eyes. He scanned the room until his gaze landed on her. A pause, a breath. And then he walked forward. "Avante," he said, low and certain. "We need to talk." She didn't move. Didn't blink. The tray in her hand trembled slightly, but she steadied it. The entire diner had gone silent. "How did you find me?" she asked. Dominic's expression softened. "You saved my daughter. I had to find the woman who walked away like it meant nothing." Ava set the tray down. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm here." And just like that, Olivia realized her quiet life had just been cracked wide open. Ava sat across from Dominic in the back booth of the diner, her apron still dusted with flour from the breakfast rush. She kept her hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, but her gaze remained on the window, not on the billionaire sitting just inches from her. It wasn't fear in her eyes, it was something deeper. Distance. A woman who had spent years learning how to disappear even when she was standing in plain sight. Dominic studied her in silence for a moment longer than he should have. Most people fawned or flattered, especially when he entered their world uninvited, but not Ava. She looked like she wanted to be anywhere but here, and yet she hadn't walked away. "I've already said thank you," he began, his voice low. "But thank you isn't enough." "I don't need anything," Ava replied quietly. "Everyone needs something." She shook her head, a small practiced smile tugging at her lips. "I have a job, a roof. That's enough." "But it doesn't have to be," Dominic pressed. "I can offer you a position, a better one, anywhere in my company, anything you're qualified for. Or financial support, if you prefer something quieter." Ava looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes weren't hard, just tired, and old in a way that didn't match her years. "I'm not a project, Mr. Vance," she said. "You don't need to fix me." "It's not about fixing," Dominic said softly. "It's about gratitude." "You already said thank you." He exhaled, defeated for the moment. But then the door opened behind him, and a small voice called out, "Ava?" Ava's face softened instantly. Emily ran toward her with unfiltered joy, her little arms wrapping around Ava's waist. The child smelled like fresh soap and strawberries. "You came," Emily beamed. "Daddy said maybe you would." Ava knelt to meet her eyes. "Just for a minute." "Can we go to the garden again?" Emily asked, tugging her hand. "Like we did after the hospital." Dominic watched as Ava's composure cracked, just a little. "Emily, maybe Ava's busy," he began. "I'm okay," Ava said, her voice steady again. "I have a break soon." Dominic gave her a questioning glance but didn't stop his daughter. The two walked outside into the sunlight while he stayed behind, watching from the window. He saw something shift. Ava crouched in the dirt next to Emily, letting the little girl pluck weeds and rearrange pebbles into strange little patterns. Ava smiled more easily with Emily than she had with him. It wasn't just warmth. It was protection. Like she understood Emily's fears in a way that went beyond logic. When Ava came back inside 20 minutes later, she expected Dominic to be gone. But he was still there, elbows resting on the table, staring at a half-full cup of coffee like it might give him answers. "She's different when she's with you," he said as Ava reached for her apron. "I'm not sure that's a good thing." "It is," he said quietly. "She hasn't smiled like that in months. Not since—" He trailed off, and Ava didn't ask him to finish. She understood grief. Understood the kind that lingers even when the world expects you to move on. "I know I'm pushing," he said, "and I know you don't want anything. But would you at least visit her sometime? She keeps asking." Ava hesitated. Her instincts screamed no. No attachments, no wealthy families, no opening the door to a past that still followed her like smoke. But Emily's arms around her waist had felt too real, too familiar. "I'll think about it," she said softly. Dominic stood. "That's all I can ask." He left with the same quiet power he'd entered with. But Ava didn't watch him go. She leaned on the counter, heart thudding. She could still feel the girl's tiny hand in hers. And she knew this wasn't over. Ava walked home that night beneath a cloudy sky, the kind that made everything feel heavier. The streets were mostly empty, the soft shuffle of her shoes the only sound as she passed shuttered shops and dim alleys. Her small studio apartment waited just 3 flights up above a closed florist, quiet and plain. But tonight, the silence pressed against her more than usual. She placed her keys down, took off her shoes, and collapsed onto the edge of the bed. Her bag, worn and stitched at the seams, sat beside her. She pulled out a faded photograph tucked inside a folded envelope. An old family snapshot, corners curled from years of being handled. Ava stared at the image like it held answers she could never ask for. A knock at the door startled her. She froze, heart skipping. No one ever came here. No one ever dared. She rose slowly and peered through the peephole, only to see a flower in a small hand. Emily, with a bodyguard nearby and Dominic standing a respectful distance behind. Ava opened the door just enough to see the child's beaming face. "I brought you a daisy," Emily said proudly, "because you looked sad." Ava blinked hard. "Thank you. That's very sweet." Dominic stepped forward, clearly uncertain if he was welcome. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it's late, but she cried the whole ride home. Said you looked like someone who needed a friend." Ava glanced between them, torn. "For a minute?" Emily asked, holding up her pinky. Ava sighed. "1 minute." She let them in. The room was small and humble, just one chair, a bookshelf, and a narrow bed. Emily didn't seem to notice. She twirled in the open space and placed the daisy in a chipped glass on the counter. "It's pretty," she said with pride. "Like you." Dominic said nothing as Ava fetched her a cup of water. Then his eyes settled on the photo on the table. "That's you?" he asked gently. Ahmad nodded. "You look different." He waited, sensing the tension in her posture. "You don't have to tell me, but I want to understand." She said nothing, only turned the photo face down. "I've seen that look before," Dominic continued. "People who've been used, hurt, watched everything they built get ripped away." And finally looked up, surprised by the edge in his voice. You too. He nodded. The media tried to destroy my wife when she got sick. Called her weak. Unfit. The day she died, they were still digging through her medical records for a headline. Eva looked down. They said worse about my mother. She didn't survive it either. A thick silence stretched between them, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt shared. I'm sorry, Dominic said sincerely. Me too, she whispered. Emily yawned and leaned her head against Ava's shoulder. Dominic rose. We'll go. Ava glanced at him, surprised. You came all this way? And we'll come again, but only if you want us to. She walked them to the door. Before he left, Dominic looked at her one last time. You don't have to keep running. I'm not running, Ava said. I'm hiding. There's a difference. Then let me help you stop. The door closed, but Ava stood there, breath trembling. In her chest, something unfamiliar stirred. Not fear, not exactly, but the terrifying hope that maybe, for once, someone meant it. And that was what scared her most. The Vance estate was unlike anything Ava had ever seen up close. Its columns, grand archways, and carefully manicured hedges whispered of old wealth and polished secrets. She clutched the hem of her thrifted dress as the driver opened the car door for her. Emily's voice cut through the air like a small, joyous trumpet. You came. The little girl rushed into Ava's arms before she'd fully stepped out. For a moment, the uncertainty melted away. Ava smiled, hugging her tightly. Emily's warmth reminded her of a little sister she hadn't seen in years. Dominic stood by the front steps, hands in his pockets, watching them. His expression unreadable, but something in his posture slightly softer than before hinted at relief. He offered a short nod. Thank you for coming. Inside, the mansion smelled like sandalwood and fresh lilies. The dining room shimmered with crystal and silver. But the centerpiece of the evening was Emily, who chattered nonstop about her drawings and her rescued doll. Ava answered gently, steering every question away from herself with careful grace. Dominic observed more than he spoke. He noticed the way Ava flinched slightly at loud noises, how she declined wine, how she cut her food in precise small bites. She was polite but distant, open yet guarded, a contradiction wrapped in quiet. At one point, Emily dropped her fork and burst into giggles. Ava reached for a napkin to help her, and Dominic caught the fleeting glimpse of something in Ava's eyes, pain, perhaps, or the ghost of a memory she didn't want to share. You're very good with her, he said, his voice low, just for her. Ava kept her eyes on her plate. She's easy to love. Dominic wanted to ask more, why she hadn't taken the money, where she'd learned to speak with such refinement, what storm she had clearly weathered. But something in her posture stopped him. She wasn't ready. Later, Emily took Ava's hand. Will you come again tomorrow? Ava smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's cheek. If your dad says it's okay. Dominic was about to say yes when a voice rang from the hallway. Well, well, who's this little dinner guest? It was Veronica Langston, Dominic's longtime associate and rumored ex. She stood poised in red silk, her eyes narrowing as they scanned Ava from head to toe. Her smile was tight, dripping in condescension. Dominic stood. Veronica, this is Ava. She saved Emily's life. Oh, I'm sure she did, Veronica said with a sugary tone. Then, turning toward Ava, she added under her breath, from waitress to high society? That's quite the leap. Ava stiffened. Veronica leaned in closer. Careful, dear. Some leaps don't end well. Ava rose from her seat without a word. I should go. Her mouth protested, but Ava gently kissed her forehead. I'll see you again soon, sweetheart. She turned to Dominic with a brittle smile. Thank you for dinner. Before he could respond, she was already gone, her soft footsteps echoing through marble halls like fading echoes of something never meant to belong. Dominic stood at the doorway for a long time after her taxi pulled away. Something about the way she walked, chin steady, didn't match the label of waitress or the assumption of charity. There was strength in her silence, and something deeper beneath it. He was no longer just intrigued, he was unsettled. That night, he opened his laptop and began typing her name into databases. except the name Ava Reyes barely existed. Dominic leaned back in his chair, staring at the search results. Nothing about Ava Reyes lined up. No social media, no school records past high school, no old employment files except for her current job at the diner. It was like she had appeared out of nowhere 5 years ago, already fully formed, already running. That level of invisibility wasn't ordinary, it was intentional. He tapped a finger against his glass of untouched bourbon, the night thick with unanswered questions. Most people who fell through society's cracks left traces. Ava had buried hers. The next morning, Emily sulked at breakfast. She didn't come back, she mumbled into her cereal. Dominic's heart twisted. Maybe she needed to rest. She said she would see me soon, Emily whispered. Dominic placed a hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. She will... But he wasn't sure. Later that day, his assistant, Rachel, stepped into his office, holding a slim folder. You ask for anything public on Ava Reyes. He took it, flipping it open. A copy of her employment application, a short lease agreement on a one-room apartment, a library card, then a blurry photo. Dominic paused. But it was old, maybe 7 years ago. Ava, younger, in a formal dress, hair longer, standing near a banner that read, Conservatorio di Belluno. A music conservatory. He frowned. She studied music? Rachel nodded. That photo came from an archived student exhibition article. No records of her graduating, though. Dominic flipped the page. There was a note scribbled at the bottom of the printout. Avagna Reyes is not her birth name. His stomach sank. He reread the words 3 times. Rachel added cautiously, Do you want me to keep digging? He hesitated, then said, quietly, No calls, no alerts. Just keep this between us. As she left, Dominic stared at the photo again. There was something in Ava's eyes, in the picture. Hopeful, unbroken, untouched by the walls she now carried around herself like armor. That girl looked like she believed in the world. The woman who saved his daughter had learned not to. Meanwhile, Ava sat in the small break room of the diner, sipping cold coffee. Her hands trembled slightly, and she limped them to still the shake. She could still hear Veronica's voice echoing in her head. The condescension, the reminder. Careful, dear, some leaps don't end well. She'd tried to play it safe, to stay small, invisible, to never rise high enough to draw attention again. And yet here she was, drawn back toward that world by a child's laughter and a man's unreadable eyes. Ava pulled out the crumpled envelope from her bag, the one she kept not because it was useful, but because it reminded her what she'd survived. Inside it, an old ID card. Faded, weathered. Isabella Calderon? She touched the name like it belonged to someone else. In many ways, it did. That girl had been full of dreams, piano scores, and endless rehearsals. That girl had been naive enough to trust the wrong man with her talent and her heart. She pressed the ID card back into the envelope and shoved it deep into her bag. Then she reached for her apron. A customer had just walked in, and her shift wasn't over. She had work to do. Pretending to be Ava Reyes wasn't over yet. Dominic stood in front of the glossy black gates of the Belluno Conservatory, the wind catching the edges of his tailored coat. The building looked the same as the photo, ornate columns, ivy climbing the stone, pride etched into every detail. But the beauty didn't distract him. His mind was racing. The woman who saved his daughter wasn't Ava Reyes. Isabella Calderon. The name was music on its own, faintly familiar. He remembered it from a headline years ago, something about a scandal, a donor, and a prodigy who vanished overnight. It had been brief, buried, but something in him knew there was more to it. He met with the conservatory's administrator, an old man with silver spectacles and a rehearsed smile. When Dominic asked about Isabella Calderon, the man's demeanor shifted. Name, he said cautiously, doesn't belong in our books anymore. An incident. Donations were impacted, reputations compromised. She was expelled? The man nodded once. Accused of theft? The donor's son claimed she stole from him. We had no choice. Evidence? The court case never happened. But we couldn't take risks. Our reputation... Dominic stood abruptly. Sometimes what destroys reputations isn't the scandal. It's the silence after. He left without another word. That evening, he drove straight to the diner. Ava Bartholomew Isabella was wiping down tables after closing when she saw him through the window. Her spine stiffened, her hand pausing mid-swipe. He entered quietly. She didn't speak at first. Neither did he. He simply placed the folder on the table, sliding it toward her. She stared at it like it was a ghost. Dominic spoke gently. "I know who you are." She swallowed. "Then you know why I ran." He said softly. "I want to hear it from you." Her eyes burned with a pain long buried. "I didn't disappear," she whispered. "I was erased." She sat, hands trembling on the table, voice catching with every word. "I was 17 when I got into Belluno, a scholarship kid. Nobody in my family had even been on a plane. But I was good, and they noticed." Who noticed? Foreign, patrons, people with names I wasn't supposed to say without permission. Her laugh was bitter. One of them, his son, acted like he owned me. I ignored him at first. Then one night, I rejected him. A week later, I was accused of stealing his watch. $1,000 heirloom. Dominic clenched his jaw. I begged them to check cameras. They said it was inconclusive. He said I'd confessed. I never did, but that didn't matter. They revoked my scholarship, expelled me. No school would take me after that. He made sure of it. Her voice broke. My name meant nothing after that. I scrubbed toilets, waited tables, changed my name. I stopped playing. I stopped dreaming. She looked up at Dominic, eyes shimmering. Better than anyone. Then, your daughter fell into that river, and for the first time in years, I didn't think. I just moved. Dominic was quiet. Then he said, "You didn't just move. You saved her. You saved us." She blinked hard. "I didn't want you to find out like this." "I'm glad I did." He reached for her hand. She flinched at first, then let him hold it. "I believe you, Isabella. Every word." Her voice barely came out. "Why?" "Because liars don't carry pain like that for years. Only survivors do." She looked away, fighting tears. "It's not your fight." Dominic didn't wait. The next morning, his legal team was on a conference call by sunrise. He gave them everything: Isabella's story, the names involved, the timeline, and the institutional cover-up that had cost her a future. His voice never wavered. It wasn't just business now, it was personal. "We're not suing for money," he said. "We're suing for truth." Later that day, he returned to the diner. Isabella wasn't there. "She's home," her coworker said softly. "Didn't feel well after yesterday." Dominic drove to her tiny apartment, the same one he'd seen from his investigator's report. A single room above a corner store, a cracked window, music sheets taped to the wall like prayers. He knocked gently. She opened the door, surprised, hair unbrushed, eyes guarded. "I didn't expect you." "I don't care about expectations," he replied. "Only justice." She stepped aside. He entered, and for a moment they stood in silence, surrounded by echoes of the life she was forced to shrink into. "I called my lawyers," he said. "They're building a case. We're filing an inquiry with the conservatory board and pushing for a public apology." Isabella turned away, voice flat. "It won't change anything." Dominic approached slowly. "It will change the lie they told about you." She bit her lip. "And when the press comes, when people see me again as the girl who might have stolen a watch, I don't have your name, Dominic. I don't have your army. You don't need armor when you've already survived fire." She looked at him then, eyes stormy. "Why are you doing this?" He hesitated, then said simply, "Because someone should have. A long time ago." The room fell still. Then she spoke, almost a whisper. "I never got to say goodbye to that version of me. The girl who believed music would save her. Who thought her hands could make something beautiful. When they expelled me, They didn't just throw me out, they took her away. Dominic reached into his coat and pulled something from the inner pocket. A program. Ballino Winter Gala 10 years ago. On the inside cover, a list of performers. Highlighted, Isabella Calderon, violin soloist. I was there, he said. I remember your performance. I didn't know it was you, but I remember thinking, that girl doesn't just play, she speaks. Her breath caught. I still speak, Isabella, even if it's not through strings anymore. She wiped a tear, laughing softly. You're not what I expected. I get that a lot. Just then, a small voice called from the hallway. Daddy? Emily peeked around the corner. She'd followed him, sleepy-eyed in a coat 2 sizes too big. When she saw Isabella, her face lit up. Isabella knelt instinctively, arms wide. Emily flew into them. I missed you, Emily whispered. I missed you too, sweet girl. Dominic watched the embrace, saw the truth in it, not charity, not pity. Later, as he walked them both to his car, Isabella paused by the passenger door. He turned. If this all falls apart, if the board denies it, if the media twists it, I need you to know something. Anything? I don't regret saving her, or meeting you, even if it started with a lie. He smiled, warm and fierce. Then let's make sure it ends with the truth. She nodded, hand finding his in the quiet between them. Together they stepped into the dark, with dawn just on the edge of the sky. The invitation came in a crumpled piece of sky-blue construction paper, folded 3 times and held together with a sticker shaped like a star. Ava found it tucked under her napkin during a quiet afternoon at the Vance estate, just after helping Emily with her homework. In the child's carefully scrawled handwriting were the words, "Please come to my school show. I'm in it, and I want you to sing. Love, Emily." Ava stared at it for a long time. Her chest tightened. She hadn't sung in front of anyone in years, certainly not since her name was dragged through mud and whispered in expensive hallways. Her voice used to be her sanctuary, her identity. Now it felt like something she wasn't allowed to touch. That evening, as Ava helped Emily brush her hair before bedtime, the little girl looked at her through the mirror and said softly, "You helped me breathe when I thought I couldn't. Will you help me sing too?" I froze. Emily's voice trembled with hope, not expectation. It wasn't just a child's request, it was a plea from someone who had also survived loss, someone who had also learned to hold her breath in silence. The night of the school performance arrived with nervous energy. The auditorium was small, filled with folding chairs and parents trying to balance phones and excitement. Dominic sat in the front row, quietly scanning the program. Emily's name was circled in pink highlighter. Backstage, Ava stood in a simple navy blue dress, her fingers shaking slightly. She could have said no. She still could. But then she heard Emily's voice calling gently, "Are you there, Ava?" Ava stepped forward, nodded once, and took her place beside the piano. The lights dimmed, a hush fell across the room, and Ava began to sing. Her voice was soft at first, uncertain, like a candle in the wind. But with every line of the lullaby, it steadied, warmed, glowed. The melody curled around the quiet space, wrapping around each listener with something unspoken, something deeper than lyrics. Parents stilled, teachers leaned in, even the children stopped squirming. Dominic's breath caught. It wasn't just beautiful, it was raw. Her voice held the ache of survival, the quiet strength of someone who had lost everything and still chose to share what was left. Emily looked up at her with wide eyes, then leaned her head against Ava's arm as the final note lingered. The audience burst into applause. But Ava didn't move. She stood there, hand trembling slightly, eyes shining, not from fear this time, from release. Afterward, backstage, Emily hugged her tightly. "You sounded like the stars," she whispered. Ava smiled, fighting the sting in her chest. "Thank you, sweetheart." Later that night, Ava stepped out onto the estate's balcony to breathe. The air was cool and still, the city lights in the distance blinking like a quiet lullaby of their own. She didn't hear Dominic approach, but she felt it, the quiet presence, the way the night seemed to pause around him. "You didn't just sing," he said gently behind her. "You gave the room something no one else could." She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "I almost didn't do it." "But you did." His voice was soft now. "You gave my daughter something she didn't even know she needed." Ava leaned against the balcony railing, her eyes cast downward. It felt like a different life, like I slipped into someone I used to be just for a moment. Dominic moved beside her but didn't touch her. His voice was low. "What happened to that girl?" "She was buried," Oba replied quietly. "Under shame, under fear, under a name that wasn't hers anymore." Dominic nodded slowly, looking out into the darkened garden. "When my wife died, I buried myself in boardrooms and quarterly reports. People thought I was strong, but I was just hiding." Ava glanced sideways at him. There was no arrogance in his face now, no power grip in his posture. Just grief, aged and quiet. "I know what it's like to live as a ghost," she said. They stood in silence for a moment, the breeze catching Ava's hair. The night air wrapped around them like a secret neither had dared say aloud until now. Dominic turned to her. "Emily adores you, not just because you saved her, but because you see her. You listen." "She listens too," Ava murmured. "She sees more than people think." "She gets that from her mother," he said softly, his gaze drifting. Ava studied him. "You don't talk about her much." "Oh, I can't." He let out a breath. "It's been 3 years and I still expect her to walk through the door some nights. But I also know she'd want me to stop surviving and start living again." Ava nodded, and maybe she'd want Emily to laugh again, to sing. "She did tonight," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Because of you." Their eyes met. The silence between them now felt different, warmer, closer. Something unspoken had shifted. Ava cleared her throat gently, breaking the moment. "You should get some rest. It's been a long day." Dominic hesitated, then nodded. "Good night, Ava." She watched him walk away, her heart thudding with something new, something terrifying. Later that night, Ava sat on the edge of her bed, fingers tracing the edges of her worn wallet. She opened it and pulled out a folded photograph. It was faded, creased from years of hiding, but still intact. A teenage girl with fire in her eyes, holding a violin. Isabella Calderon. She stared at it for a long time. That girl had wanted to change the world with music. That girl had believed in justice and light and truth. And then everything was taken. But tonight, something inside her stirred. Maybe she wasn't gone. Maybe she'd just been waiting for the right moment, for the right voice to call her back. For a 6-year-old girl with a paper star and a trembling plea. Ava tucked the photo back in carefully and turned out the light. Down the hallway, Dominic stood outside Emily's room, watching his daughter sleep, the corners of her mouth still curved into a dream-filled smile. He exhaled slowly, hand pressed to the doorframe. "Thank you," he whispered, to the dark, to the night, or maybe to the woman who had begun to soften the edges of his world. Somewhere in the stillness, in the echo of a lullaby, 2 broken souls were finding music again. The morning paper hit newsstands with a slap that echoed through the quiet of the Vance estate. Dominic stood in the doorway of his study, gripping the headline as if it were a dagger. "Savior or Scandal? CEO's new flame has a hidden past." Ava's face was splashed across the front page, side by side with a cropped image from her old conservatory days. The article dug up every painful accusation, every whisper from her former life. It was a complete invasion. Emily found the paper first. Her little hands trembled as she carried it to Dominic. "Why are they saying bad things about Ava?" she asked, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Dominic knelt beside her. "Because sometimes the truth gets twisted, sweetheart, but we know who Ava really is." Emily nodded. "She saved me. She sings better than anyone. And she listens, even when I whisper." Dominic folded the paper and stood. His phone was already buzzing with messages from board members, PR agents, and advisors. They all wanted the same thing: distance, silence, damage control. But Dominic Vance had already made up his mind. A vast sense of sadness and emptiness. A small apartment above the diner, staring at the photo she'd taped to the fridge the night Emily performed. Her and the little girl holding hands. It was the first time she'd truly smiled in a long time. Now, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her manager said the diner was getting calls. Customers were leaving harsh notes with their bills. She felt like a ghost again, but this time, the shame wasn't hers. It belonged to those who never bothered to ask what really happened. A soft knock startled her. When she opened the door, Dominic stood there. No suit, no armor. Just a man who looked like he hadn't slept. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I never meant to bring trouble into your life." "You didn't," he replied. "They did, but I'm not going to let them win." She stared at him, stunned. "You're bored. Your reputation." "Can burn," he interrupted, voice calm but fiery. "Emily cried this morning. She thought someone was going to take you away." Ava's breath caught. "I told her no one's taking you anywhere, not if I can help it." The press conference was scheduled for noon. Dominic stood before a packed room of journalists and cameras, his jaw set. Ava watching nervously from a private corner. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to speak not as a CEO, but as a father and a man who knows the truth." He glanced briefly at Ava, then back at the crowd. "Euripius. Arise, some of you now know her, Isabella Calderon, saved my daughter's life. She didn't ask for money, she didn't ask for recognition, she simply walked away. That is the kind of character she carries." Her voice steadied, a few murmurs rose. Flashes from cameras lit the room. Her past, as painful as it is not a crime. It's a mirror of how this world sometimes treats those without power. She was accused, yes, but never convicted. She was silenced, and yet, she found her voice again for my daughter. He paused. "So today, I'm proud to announce that Ava will be joining the Vance Foundation as Director of Advocacy for the falsely accused." Gasps filled the air. Because this isn't about saving face, it's about saving people like her. Later that evening, Ava sat beside him on the terrace overlooking the city. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. He turned to her. "You were willing to disappear to protect yourself. I wasn't willing to let the world lose someone like you." Her eyes brimmed. "I've never been fought for before." Dominic took her hand, voice steady. "You will be, for the rest of your life if you let me." And for the first time, Ava let herself believe it might be true. Ava sat on the edge of the small bench just outside the foundation's rooftop terrace, the city stretching out beneath her like a living, breathing judgment. Her fingers curled around the railing, knuckles white. Inside, the board meeting was underway. She wasn't invited in, not this time, not when she was the subject of the discussion. Behind her, the glass door opened softly. Dominic stepped out, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight from stress. But when his eyes met hers, something warm cut through the tension. "You want me to release a statement?" he said quietly, walking over. "They say the board's reputation is at stake." Ava stared out at the skyline. "You don't have to defend me, Dominic. I know what this looks like." "I'm not defending you because I have to," he said firmly. "I'm doing it because it's right." She turned her head slightly, her voice brittle. "You could lose everything, donors, investors. I'm not worth that." Dominic moved closer, placing a hand on the cold railing beside hers. "You saved my daughter's life. You gave her her voice back, and you reminded me I still had one too. That's worth everything." Tears burned in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. Later that afternoon, Dominic called a press conference in front of the foundation's headquarters. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged forward as he stepped up to the podium, flanked by his communications team. Ava watched from the second-floor window, breath caught in her throat. "My name is Dominic Vance," he began, his voice steady but passionate. "And I stand here not just as a CEO, but as a father, and as a man who has learned what justice and loyalty truly means." The crowd quieted. Microphones inched closer. A woman named Ava Reyes, known to some as Isabella Calderon, was falsely accused years ago of a crime she did not commit. That accusation ruined her dreams, but it never ruined her character. He glanced up, right toward the window where she stood. Their eyes met. She saved my daughter's life, and more than that, she reminded me what integrity looks like. The board has asked me to distance the foundation from her. I refuse. Instead, I'm offering her a permanent role here, leading a new initiative dedicated to helping the falsely accused rebuild their lives. Gasps echoed from the crowd. She is not a threat to our mission, he said, his voice rising. She is our mission. Inside the building, Ava finally broke. She sank to her knees beside the window, hands covering her mouth. The sobs came then, not loud or dramatic, but raw and deep. The kind of crying that came from years of silence finally shattered. When Dominic returned, she was still sitting there, trying to gather herself. He walked up slowly, crouched down, and held out a simple folder. "What's this?" she asked hoarsely. "Your employment offer," he said gently. "Name your title, name your terms." She laughed through her tears. "I've never even had a resume that didn't get me laughed out of a room." Dominic smiled softly. "Then let this be your first." She took the folder with trembling fingers. "I've never been fought for before." He leaned in, brushing a hand over her hair. "Get used to it." From the corner of the hallway, a small figure peeked around the door. Emily tiptoed in, holding something behind her back. She walked up shyly, looking from Ava to Dominic. "Daddy said you're staying," she whispered. Ava nodded. "If that's okay with you." Emily pulled her hand forward. It was a small bouquet, wildflowers she must have picked from the garden out back. "These are for brave people," she said solemnly. Closed his eyes, a voice trembling. "Then I think these really belong to you." Emily shook her head, hugging Ava tightly. "You're brave. You stayed." And for the first time, Ava believed she might actually be home. The night of the charity gala shimmered with elegance. Chandeliers glowing like stars overhead, glasses clinking, laughter echoing through the grand ballroom. Ava stood near the edge of the crowd, wearing a simple navy gown that clung to her like second skin. Her hair, usually tied back for long, diner shifts, now flowed in soft waves past her shoulders. She looked out of place, and yet, somehow, she wasn't. Dominic spotted her from across the room, momentarily breathless. For a man used to commanding rooms, tonight he was the one arrested by presence. Ava's vigary. He made his way through the crowd, his tux crisp, every step deliberate. When he reached her, he offered his hand, eyes soft with something unspoken. "I never thought I'd be here," Ava whispered, her voice trembling with more than nerves. Dominic smiled. "Neither did I." They danced slowly, away from the center, beneath a skylight where the stars peeked through. Ava's hand rested on his shoulder, her fingers brushing against the fabric of his suit like it burned. He leaned in, his lips near her ear. "You belong here. Maybe more than anyone else." Later, after most of the guests had left and the music faded, Dominic walked her out to the garden. They wandered along a stone path framed by roses, the scent heavy in the humid air. Under a silver maple, he stopped. "Emily talks about you constantly," he said, his voice low. "You've brought a kind of light I didn't think we'd feel again." Ava turned toward him, her eyes glossy. "I'm afraid of being happy," she said quietly, "because every time I have been, it gets taken away." Dominic reached up and gently cupped her cheek. "Then let me be the one who makes you unafraid." She searched his eyes, every instinct screaming to run, but his gaze didn't demand, it only waited. Slowly their kiss came softly, naturally, not desperate, not rushed. It lingered like a promise, trembling with the fear of everything it could become. The next day, Emily surprised them both. She presented Ava with a crayon drawing, a family portrait. Herself in the middle, holding one hand of her dad and one of Ava's. The image was crooked, colorful, and devastatingly sweet. At the top, she'd written in block letters, "My family." Ava blinked, speechless. Dominic crouched beside Emily. "Why did you draw this, sweetheart?" Emily shrugged like it was obvious. "Because she saved me, and she loves us." Ava had to step away for a moment, the paper trembling in her grip. Later, she tucked it into her purse like a sacred thing. But just as they seemed to find something worth keeping, the past clawed its way forward again. The man who had falsely accused Ava all those years ago, the donor's son, now a real estate mogul, reached out through his lawyer. He wanted to resolve matters quietly. Hush money. A six-figure check to keep her story buried, her silence ensured. The letter arrived in a heavy envelope embossed with gold. Ava stared at it across her kitchen table, the smell of ink and entitlement wafting up as she opened it. Her hands didn't shake, not anymore. She brought it to Dominic that evening. "He thinks I'll take money to forget what he did," she said, placing the letter between them. "That I'll sell the truth for comfort." Dominic didn't blink. "What do you want to do?" Ava folded the letter in half, then again and again, until it was nothing more than a corner of a lie. "I want to fight." Dominic met her gaze with unwavering certainty. "Then we fight him, together." The morning after Ava's decision, a quiet storm brewed within her. She stood at the diner where she once poured coffee and cleaned counters, now reading a draft of her public statement. Dominic's legal team had offered to handle it for her, but Ava had asked to write it herself. Every word was hers, every syllable a thread pulled from the fabric of years lived in silence. Dominic waited beside her as she stood at the podium inside a modest community center. Reporters murmured, microphones aimed, cameras rolling. Ava stepped forward. No stylist, no polished rehearsals, just truth. "My name is Isabella Calderon," she began. "For years, I was taught to be ashamed of that name, not because I did something wrong, but because I was wronged." The room stilled. "I was expelled, accused of a theft I didn't commit. I was 19. I lost my future. My name became a stain, not a story. But I won't let silence write the rest of it." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "To the man who sent me hush money, you took so much from me already. My dreams, my voice, my name. You won't buy what's left." Gasps rippled across the room. Dominic watched, pride burning behind his eyes. Ava stepped back. The crowd erupted in claps, not frenzied, but sincere. Every sound felt like another chain falling from her chest. That night, as they sat on the rooftop terrace of Dominic's home, Ava breathed easier. The city lights stretched before them, and for once, they didn't feel too bright or too far away. "I never imagined I'd tell my story like that," she said, cradling a cup of tea. Dominic smiled. "You didn't just tell it, you owned it." Emily padded onto the terrace in her pajamas, holding a small blanket. She climbed into Ava's lap without a word and rested her head on her chest. "Mommy used to sing to me under the stars," Emily said sleepily. "Now you do." Ava looked to Dominic, eyes wide, caught between joy and fear. "She misses her," Dominic said gently, "but that doesn't mean she can't love you too." Ava kissed the top of Emily's head. "I'm not here to replace anyone, just to stay, if that's okay." Emily nodded, already half asleep. The next day, Dominic brought her to the foundation he ran, one now preparing to launch a new division, an initiative to support those falsely accused, especially young women in education programs. He led her into the sunlit conference room and handed her an official offer. "Director of Second Chances," the title read. Ava looked up, tears threatening again. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "This is yours. You've earned every inch of this life." She shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. "I've never been fought for before." Dominic reached across the table, his hand warm over hers. "Well, get used to it." That night, she hung the framed family drawing Emily made in her small apartment kitchen. A temporary place, maybe, but no longer a hiding spot. As she stood back to admire it, her phone buzzed. It was Dominic. "Emily wants to know if you'll come read her favorite book again tonight." Ava smiled, tears prickling behind her lashes. "I'm already on my way," she whispered. And with that, the girl once erased stepped boldly into a life that not only remembered her, but finally welcomed her name. The courtroom was silent, every breath held, as the judge's gavel came down with a definitive thud. Isabella Calderon stood straight, shoulders trembling, heart racing. The words echoed through the room like a bell pealing in the distance. Olivia's court recognizes the wrongful allegations against Isabella Calderon and formally expunges her record. Her name is hereby cleared. Gasps, murmurs, even a few teary smiles rippled across the room. But Isabella's eyes stayed locked on Emily's. The little girl sat with Dominic in the front row, swinging her legs and beaming, as if she had always known this moment would come. Isabella covered her mouth with one hand, the other gripping the edge of the table for balance. Dominic stood slowly, his gaze never leaving her, then stepped forward. Instead of moving to congratulate her like others, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Dominic," she breathed, confused. He didn't kneel, he didn't need to. His voice cut through the room with quiet certainty. And then he was gone, leaving me there too. "Ava or Isabella?" I said, "I'm not asking you because you saved my daughter. I'm asking you because you saved me too. Ava or Isabella, past or future, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. Emily jumped up in her seat and shouted, "Say yes! Say yes!" Laughter bubbled around the room. Isabella looked at them both, Dominic, calm and unwavering, and Emily, her small hands clasped as if in prayer. "Bitches," Isabella whispered. "1,000 times yes." Cheers rose. Someone clapped. The judge smiled knowingly. The weeks that followed passed in a golden blur. The media, once quick to shame, now painted a very different story. One of redemption, courage, and a love story that felt too poetic to be real. But Isabella didn't care for the headlines anymore. All she cared about was the river. The wedding took place where it had all begun. The riverbank where she had once pulled Emily from the current, breathless and cold. Now it was a place of life, of second chances. The trees swayed with a breeze that carried lilac and laughter. Emily, wearing a crown of wildflowers, skipped down the makeshift aisle first, tossing petals into the wind like magic. She wore a white dress just like Isabella's, simple, flowing, and touched with gold at the hem. Dominic stood at the altar, his eyes glassy but his smile solid. His suit was gray, his tie the same pale blue as the sky above them. Isabella stepped forward, each footfall on the grass feeling like the closing of a wound. She didn't walk alone. She walked with everything she had lived through: grief, shame, fire, and forgiveness. At the altar, Dominic took her hands, steady and warm. "You sure?" she teased, barely holding back her tears. "Of everything in my life," he said, voice thick, "this is the one thing I'll never doubt." As the officiant spoke, Emily stood beside them, one hand gripping Isabella's dress, the other holding Dominic's. When they kissed, slow, sure, a promise carved in sunlight, Emily clapped again, her voice rising into the air like a prayer fulfilled. The reception was held beneath strings of golden lights, draped from tree to tree. Tables lined with wildflowers and linen were surrounded by family, friends, and even a few strangers who had once whispered her name with doubt and now spoke it with reverence. Isabella sat between Emily and Dominic, her fingers interlaced with his beneath the table. Her dress was wrinkled from hugging too many people, her cheeks ached from smiling, but in her chest there was something she hadn't felt in years. Dominic raised a glass, clearing his throat. "I spent a long time protecting myself," he began, his voice carrying across the lawn, hiding behind schedules and boardrooms, afraid that letting someone in would mean losing control. But then, someone jumped into a river and reminded me that sometimes losing control is exactly how you find what matters. He looked at Isabella. "She didn't just save my daughter, she saved every part of me I thought was gone." A soft hush fell over the crowd. Isabella stood slowly. Her voice trembled at first, but the strength grew as she spoke. "I used to think stories like this only happened in fairy tales," she said. "But mine didn't begin with magic. It began with silence, with running, with being erased." She paused, eyes locking with Emily's. "Somehow, love found its way, in a little girl's laughter, in a man's quiet strength, in a place I never thought I'd belong again." She took a breath, and her words softened. "To anyone out there who thinks they've been forgotten or ruined, I promise you, sometimes the life you think is over is just the beginning of something new. Applause followed, gentle, teary, real. Later, Isabella stepped away from the crowd. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the river's edge. She stood there for a long moment, the wind catching the hem of her dress, eyes on the current. Dominic joined her silently, slipping an arm around her waist. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" she asked, not turning her head. "You saved Emily?" he replied. She nodded. "I said I didn't want anything. And I told you I couldn't forget your face." They stood in silence for a beat. Then she said, "The truth is, I saved your daughter once, but she saved me back. She gave me a reason to believe again." He leaned in and kissed her temple. Behind them, Emily's laughter rang out as she chased butterflies near the edge of the garden. Her joy was boundless, fearless, and in that moment, under a sky painted in fire and blush, Isabella Calderon finally felt her name settle into something more than cleared. It was cherished. Home was not where she came from. It was where she had chosen to stay, with the man who stood beside her, with the girl who had given her wings, with a past acknowledged, a future embraced, and a present more beautiful than any music she'd ever written. Forever had finally begun.